A lot of people are starting to live with all of the information that emergency planners live with all the time, but without necessarily any of the coping skills that we're also given for how to process, but also put that away and do other things. I very nearly wrote a scenario about that factory, and I stopped doing that because I've had so many correct hits where I become the Cassandra and I make an exercise and it becomes real. And the next day, for real, that factory had a major fire and it has injured several of its workers. One of the things that's very relevant to businesses, and particularly in those high risk, high safety conferences, is fatigue in business and exhaustion in business. And I think that's really important. So one of the things that we're seeing is both exhaustion and a real overuse of goodwill by businesses, but also no way to easily remunerate or say thank you. 2026 is going to be a really interesting year for acknowledging how run down and how potentially unwell both employees and employers may be.
Hello and welcome to Being Crisis Prepared, the business continuity podcast with Inveroy Crisis Management. And today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Professor Lucy Easthope. For those that don't know, Lucy is widely regarded as one of, if not the leading emergency planner or planning expert within the United Kingdom. If you haven't read her books, I encourage you to go and Google them and find them. Information can be found at whatevernext.info. Lucy, if I'm not careful, I will spend the next 20 minutes saying wonderful things about you, which is obviously fine. But is there something that you would just like to sort of summarize some career highlights for the listener before we get going?
Well, as you say, I think one of the things is to direct people to all the lovely opportunities I have to talk about the backstory, because what I'm finding is that's often what people are very interested in. So I definitely direct them to my desert island discs, which was a real privilege to do. One place I always give a shout out in my biog is the wonderful Centre for Death and Society at the University of Bath, where I have my professorship, and they've always scaffolded and supported my strange path to date. So that's always a very special place to me. But both books, When the Dust Settles and Come What May, one of the things that I really wanted to do was you get a real sense of me as well. So, that's the obvious place for people to start.
And certainly those who are professional in this area or just interested, I have realized a mistake that when I read your book, I started putting Post-its down the side of interesting bits that I wanted to come back to. And I needed a second pad by the time I'd finished the book. It was just covered, and then I couldn't see the bits for the Post-it. So it was it's high protein stuff for anyone that is a professional in this space. Resilience, people, business, resilience, and how to deal with, prepare for, respond to emergencies. Just get a copy of the book. Lucy, thank you for joining us today. I'm conscious that we're recording this in the middle of December 2025. What has been an interesting year, and as we speak, the horrendous news over the weekend of the massacre on the beach in Bondi, but the news through the year has had some interesting examples of resilience that jump out, and I wondered whether there's anything that is on your mind at the moment, or perhaps something that you could share with the listeners that has occupied you over the last few months.
There's just, as you say, there's so much going on. And I think one of the things that really struck me this morning is that a lot of people are starting to live with all of the information that emergency planners live with all the time. So what's going on here? What's going on here? But without necessarily any of the coping skills that we're also given, or we like to talk about, for how to process, but also put that away and do other things. And that was a real motivation behind Come What May, the new book, was about, okay, we're emergency planners. So, people were very interested. Do we live in this constant state of heightened alert? So one of the things actually I would say is I'm very aware of what's going on in the world today, but I also do a lot of things to mean that I can talk to you and be sort of with and then in the moment without this bearing very, very heavily. And what I'm noticing, lots of opinion pieces and things, is people saying, how do we live in this state? So I really want people in our field to think about that a little bit more, because otherwise they are living in kind of constant fight and flight. So at the moment, I think you and I probably had a very strong sense that we were going into an autumn and winter of possibly quite bad weather. That's certainly going on around us. There's a lovely chap who writes about nature and particularly what's called the mass seasons. We have this very florid and very fertile summer with lots of berries coming into the autumn. And people were like, does that mean we have a bad winter? That's always been the theory, is that if you have a mass summer and autumn, you'll have this very bad winter. And I was grilling him and he was trying to say to me, it's not a given, but there was a part of me that was like, this is going to be a bad weather winter. And so one of the things that you find me doing a lot via, say, my social media is talking to people about things they can do and getting ready. So another thing I'd really ask people to listen to is a new program I've just done on, it's available now on BBC Sounds. It went out on Radio 4, called Are You Ready? And I'm doing a lot around citizen preparedness at the moment. For me, I'm always very, very interested in the human aspects of what's sort of sold to us as a business continuity crisis. Mm-hmm. And so one I'm really interested at the moment is the very long, chronic, very depressing tale of the Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack. And that's one I've been really interested in. And we're really starting to see the human cost of that.
I was interested last week when they announced the GDP figures for October. And they said it was minus 0.1, I think it was. But the impact of Jaguar Land Rover, even though that is the plants have restarted, but just one company of that scale can have an impact of half a percentage point on the UK's GDP. That is massive when you think of it in those terms. And that ability for, who knows at the moment, because I'm sure it's being investigated, but that cause of that incident, and the impact on all the supply chain, that the thousands of people. As emergency planners, sometimes we do forget that at the bottom end of everything is the impact on people. And yes, a business can go bankrupt, or I was thinking, you mentioning about the weather. I live up in Scotland, and a couple of years ago was the Brecon floods. As you say, Cumbria at the moment is being hammered by the rain. Yes, we can put in a nice plan and we can run our exercises and we can make sure the right resources are available. But it's people that are impacted when they lose their home, when they lose their possessions and so on. And if we don't take that into, we don't look ourselves in the mirror and say, are we doing the best we can for the people involved? Then actually we're not very good as emergency planners. The Jaguar Land Rover piece is an example of, it's just a cyber attack. No, it's not. It's life for those people that are impacted.
Yeah, and actually there's a bigger danger, isn't there, as it starts to hit all those big numbers, I think that the billion cost and into the GDP and all that kind of thing, is that one of the things that struck me almost immediately, and I'm from areas with very heavy dependence on employers like Jaguar Land Rover, is how many firms were supplying it. So it's had a huge effect on the supply chain. But also one of the things that this time of year, a lot of, and often, I mean, there is a growing female workforce, but often it's the male workforce use this time of year to gather overtime, which funds their families through the winter and funds Christmas and things like that. So often for me, when I'm given the big picture, I'm looking for, as you say, the kind of chain within. And one of the things that I'm really interested in when I'm going out and doing training and exercising now is to talk about who's dependent on you in the supply chain. And I think one of the things that's unusual about the way that I work is I do dance very comfortably between the public sector and the private sector. And when you go into the private sector, obviously they're calling things much more disaster recovery, business continuity, crisis management. But the issues that we face are often very, very similar, and they forget who relies on them. So one of the things that was really interesting for me when business continuity was really becoming very, very popular in the early 2000s, and there was lots of discussion around British standards and the international standards, I was asked more and more to look at the human costs of a business continuity incident, revisiting issues of all of the human factors that occur in a business continuity incident, and also issues like insurance. And it's really, really lovely to have the chance to speak to you about that.
Well, thank you. And the human impact of business continuity, when you think through some of the issues that we've seen in 2025, and I made a quick scribbled note as we were talking there, yes, the rain at the moment in Cumbria, Dumfries and Galloway, but from Scotland point of view, the wildfires are becoming more and more prevalent in the summer. So we go from one extreme to the other, mass rain and then fires. Your beloved Liverpool football club celebrating victory in the summer, and the driver that drove into the crowd, then all the people that are affected. And I wonder about your thoughts on, sometimes does social media help with these incidents, or is there a little bit of Me Too that goes on? And I'm seeing news articles at the moment talking about Michael Vaughan commenting on the Bondi Beach because he was 300 meters away, and suddenly it becomes a "I was there" type thing, or is it actually that is a good vehicle for allowing people to express that emotion and get it out there, and almost sort of cathartic of, I've shared it, it's gone, I now feel better. Where is the balance?
We're certainly all feeling it, aren't we? And again, this was something I really wanted to tackle in Come What May. And it's a very common, and in fact, in both books, I go there in When the Dust Settles as well. It's a very common human reaction to want to understand and place your own feelings. So one of the most common things we see, for example, is people, and we also had a university shooting this weekend. So lots of people were placing themselves as having been alumni or having just left the area. It's a very important form of sense making. And what social media does is it's a vehicle by which you can put that out there, and then often in the comments people will say, you're making this about you or whatever, and it's something that I write about in Come What May called the ripple effect. So one of the things we have to consider as emergency planners, and indeed as business senior leadership, is how people are going to feel when the incident happens and how they are going to feel affected. So something like with a university or school incident, a community of alumnus is often very important to consider. One thing that, and sometimes with emergency planners, you end up really worrying about your feeling as a Cassandra, the goddess who would predict things and be ignored. And we were out in our local town having a tandoori, and I was watching how many workers were coming from a factory. And one of the things that we see is when people feel their place has been affected. And I was watching these workers thinking there's often a very complicated relationship with a factory or a business. They may moan about the bosses, but when something happens, they feel very, very connected. We see it, for example, in places with a very large chemical factory or a large nuclear factory or an oil rig, particularly. And I was watching them, and then you could see the factory from their window. And the next week I was in with sixth formers looking at business continuity for their A-level. And I very nearly wrote a scenario about that factory, and I stopped doing that because I've had so many correct hits where I become the Cassandra, and I make an exercise and it becomes real. And the next day, for real, that factory had a major fire, and it has injured several of its workers. And one of the things that you often see is, say, through social media, people wanting to make a connection, but also criticizing a business. And these are very complicated times, I think, to have relationships with big business and corporations. And funnily enough, I saw the sixth formers later at a second event, and I said I was going, they were now looking at this as yet another one of their case studies. And I said, actually, I was going to use it the day before, and I didn't, just in case I rattled the fates, the Cassandra's burden. And I think it's really interesting about when you're looking, for example, as a business, about things like your social media strategy. What will you expect people to post? Quite often now we see disgruntled employees post. We see social media as a very difficult vehicle, I think, for messaging, but also I would be very lost without it. So when I'm doing a lot of work with businesses at the moment, one of the things I'm asking them to explore is their whole, not just their social media policy, but their whole experience and sense of how it's being used, for example, by their community and their employees. I was with a university training for Major Incident about a month ago, and their new head of comms had come from industry. And she was very used to a lockdown approach to social media, where businesses say we don't post anything except the one official channel. And the university said, we can't do that. We're a place of academic freedom. So one of the things I think is really interesting is going forward how media will be used for crisis. There's a lot of condemnation of the bad press conference, of the unready chief executive. And so these are all things that I think when you're looking in 2025, 26 at overhauling your plans, and one of the things I'm a big fan of is a constant cycle of review of planning, is where are we with
Yeah.
our social media appetite? And do you know what stuns me? And you'll be the same. We've still got boards and chief executives being caught out by either citizen journalism or traditional journalism. So we're still getting the split screen where the board is denying something, and the other side is showing, the journalists are showing what's gone wrong. So that's really interesting to me. We're in the middle of some epic PR disasters, so things like Southeast Water's handling of their recent water contamination. And one of the things that you'll see me do a lot is both call out bad examples and good examples of business continuity crisis comms. And so I think 2026 is going to be a year when we see even more of that. But certainly placing yourself within the incident is a very common phenomenon. And it's a good form of processing what you've been through. And that was a big part of Come What May, was helping people to understand the feelings they might feel from all the psychologists that have helped me.
You certainly triggered a thought there for me that we train relative response teams on how to respond to someone ringing into that classic number that you see at the bottom of the screen that says, if you think your loved one is involved, ring this number. Well, someone then has to answer the phone and say, are you entitled as the next of kin to receive this information, and should our HR team do a one-to-one connection to keep you up to date and so on? Traditionally, that has been, if you're not the next of kin, then you don't get any information. Well, as you say now, citizen journalism means, I'm their next door neighbor, I'm a sister, I'm playing football with them, I drink with them. There are so many different people that now have that connection. When I first left the army and started doing business continuity, a gentleman called Albert Thompson up in Aberdeen used to do a sort of graph of how many people are involved in the incident. And it used to be, 2 parents, 3 siblings, 2 living grandparents, 3 tennis partners, and the number went up and up and up and up. And it suddenly became, thousands of people have a connection to the one person that is there. And that's now 15 years ago. And social media has changed that yet again. So it is a continuing story, I think, for 2026, is that battle for how do you fight the good fight. And being ex-military, there's an example, the Ajax armored fighting vehicle that is something like 8 years late into production and £6 billion. The minister a couple of months ago said, yes, it's all fantastic. And then an exercise a couple of weeks later, 15 people came out of the back of it with hearing loss and vomiting. And the answer of, don't believe everything you hear in the press. Difficult. So as you say, that how does the left hand get it so wrong when it doesn't speak to the right hand, again, is sadly an ongoing issue, I think. Is there anything else that has sort of struck you through 2025, or, as you say, an ongoing issue into 2026 that you'd like to share with the listeners?
I think one thing that's very important in if we're looking at the human aspects of business continuity, which are really important to me, and there's no such thing really as of business without its people. It's always the taxi drivers that are my barometer of where the world is. And a guy said to me this month, there won't be any humans left to do jobs in a year's time. I don't think we're quite there yet. There'll always be humans. And I think one of the things that's very relevant to businesses, and I've done a lot of conferences this year, and particularly in those high risk, high safety conferences, is fatigue in business and exhaustion in business. And I think that's really important. What we're asking of people, goodwill. One of the things that's very interesting for me, again, with this sort of constant lens of the human aspects of business continuity, is it's very difficult, for example, at the moment, to reward people. It used to be that you could put a Christmas bonus in. Things like honorariums and bonuses can really screw up things like universal credit, child support payments, and indeed your tax code. So one of the things that we're seeing is both exhaustion and a real overuse of goodwill by businesses, but also no way to easily remunerate or say thank you. So I think 2026 is going to be a really interesting year for acknowledging how run down and how potentially unwell both employees and employers may be. And that may all sound quite depressing, but one of the things that I really urge, and I'm very grateful to the companies that are innovative enough to ask for disaster recovery, not in the IT sense, but in the human sense, very early on. Some companies were very, very insightful and asked for support at the very start of the pandemic around coming back. So some of the companies, for example, were very, very insightful about the role that coming back from furlough has played on morale and esteem. People who were furloughed, and we knew this would happen, people who were furloughed felt very overlooked. So ironically, what was right perhaps as a short-term economic measure really changed the workforce. We're seeing a lot of what I write about called the Great Exodus. So people very, very run down and very peeved with their management, just exiting with all that corporate knowledge. So one of the things about 2026, I would say, is it's all about people management or human resources or whatever you're calling it. You don't want to wait for an incident to really look at the empathy within your plans, to look at how you're supporting women in the workforce, those custard cream generation, people that are both caring for older relatives and have had their children later. One of the things that I'm really inspired by is the companies that get me in early without an incident to look at the empathy of their planning. Some corporations and other types of organizations, they're very underinsured for an incident. And you might say, well, is that a human aspects issue? Well, of course it is. So one of the things that I find, for example, again, coming back to the universities example, a lot of corporations and universities and other organizations, schools, are not insured for any personal items in your office. So a good example that we find in the academic world is offices are not covered for things like a personal book collection. And one of the things that you're really seeing in the health sector is a corporate moral injury. So people saying, I gave you everything when you had your incident. But then when I turn around and said, I've also lost my computer and my books, you say, I'm not covered. So one of the things I love doing with companies is helping them before the incident hits. We're also seeing for things like cyber attacks, they usually come when a company is perhaps quite weary or fatigued. Sometimes they come at a place where you're already suffering another incident, and quite often they come through things like clicking a link. So things like quite high punitive behaviors to employees who have clicked that link. So all of these things really interest me. And obviously I'm just very sort of vexed about how we get people through this very long chronic slump of the pandemic. One thing that managers are very afraid of doing is acknowledging what the pandemic did. Like, we're trying to style it out, aren't we? And one of the bravest things, and I've certainly been doing a lot this year with things like the travel sector and, as I say, some of the high risk industries, to acknowledge what it did to your workforce is not you saying that you haven't got plans for the future, or you're dwelling, or you're kind of, hanging around in this viscous slump, as I call it, in Come What May. What you're doing with that is really acknowledging that you see what people gave you as an organization. And I'm just not seeing enough of that.
From my days in the army, the idea of battle shock and the First World War, they used this idea of the bank of courage, and that people effectively have a bank account, and the over time your bank account has a series of withdrawals, and then you'd go back to recover and have the lice taken out of your jacket and get a wash and some decent food, so your bank account would be topped back up again, and then you'd come back to the front line. And I can see that sort of bank of goodwill is exactly the same in an emergency, that the company, you build up an element of goodwill because you've been paid on time, you've got a number of days off, you might get a bonus, all that sort of keeps your bank account well topped up. And then the disruption occurs, and suddenly the company is taking withdrawals from that bank account. Yeah. And if it gets into an overdrawn situation, what can the company do to top it back up again? Is it just we are so grateful, thank you, which goes a very long way? Yeah. Or is it a bunch of flowers to your partner to say, we appreciate that you were inconvenienced, not just the working member? And that bank of goodwill of how do you do that pre, during, and after the event, so that those people that typically, there's always a carder, isn't there, that lean into a problem, and they're the ones that you go, if something bad happens, I want you, and you in my team. Well, afterwards, if you've upset them, so they're just going to go, do you know what? I've got a bit of a headache. I need to walk the dog. I need to take the dog to the vet. So they're not available when the balloon goes up. I'm conscious that we are coming towards the end of our time with you, Lucy. So I'm really grateful for those insights of things you've been battling with through 2025 and things you're aware are coming down the track for 2026. But on that topic, if you will forgive me, I must just tell our listeners that the other news for 2026 is the Scottish Continuity Group conference is on Tuesday, the 24th of February at Dynamic Earth in Edinburgh. And we are absolutely thrilled that Lucy has kindly agreed to start the day with being the first speaker to set the scene and excite our audience. So, Lucy, thank you so much for agreeing to come to Edinburgh. I think on the night of the 23rd, and we'll have a meal beforehand and then start the day in Dynamic Earth on the 24th. I won't ask you what your topic's going to be because I appreciate we've got a couple of months before we get there and things could change. We are super grateful for that. And I think hopefully the listeners will have had some exposure of, oh, that's high protein stuff. I want to be in that audience and listen to your talk on the day. Is there anything by way of a sort of broad theme that you might be thinking of at the moment, or is that too early to say?
Well, I think hopefully listeners have certainly got an idea of the things that kind of, are making me passionate and are really interesting. And I really want, as you say, respond to what's gone on. We'll be a couple of months down the track. And the other great thing for me is I always look at events and look at the rest of the program, and it's a really, really exciting program. And one of the things that you really do get a sense from me is I never go to something where I don't learn as well. And I think there'll be this real mix of insight, and all of us, what I can tell from the program is all of us will be using clear lessons identified from recent incidents, and that's what practitioners really need at the moment. And we do something in disaster management that's very important called isomorphic learning, where we don't need to be working in retail or working in cyber crime or any of those sorts of things to be able to take identifiable lessons. So one of the things I do, depending on when I'm on in the program, is I'm always listening to the speakers before me, and they are usually sparking 1,000 thoughts in my mind. But I think it'll just be really lovely to meet with and to talk to colleagues on exactly the kind of themes we've covered today. So that will be what I'll be hoping to do. But I'll certainly keep a few things back to surprise the audience. But no, I'm really looking forward to it, and thank you to the Scottish Continuity Resilience Scotland Annual Conference for the event. I really appreciate that.
So, in which case, Lucy, thank you so much for your time today. I really look forward to seeing you in person in a couple of months' time on the 24th of February. If anyone is looking for more information about the conference, it's on www.scottishcontinuity.com/events. And just to remind you, if you're after more information about Lucy, please do just press Google. Oddly enough, you will find everything. But whatevernext.info, I think, is the correct site that you should be looking for more information about Lucy directly. But for now, Lucy, thank you so much for your time this morning. If it's not too early, I hope you have a peaceful Christmas and chance to turn your laptop off and enjoy some family time. And we'll see you in the new year.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it.